Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, also the author of Between Two Scorpions. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And Jim, let's begin with the good, and we're kind of using that in quotes today because, once again, we're talking about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, and there's really nothing good about that, other than the fact that he could potentially be going to prison for a very long time, thanks to these new charges that are being filed in the Southern District of New York. But a lot of the focus over the ensuing days this week has been on the role that current Labor Secretary Alex Acosta played on this case while he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida back in the last decade when this was all dealt with and the plea bargain was arranged that did send Epstein to jail for a little while. Not long enough in the minds of many people. And, of course, the biggest criticism was that he didn't run it by the victims before agreeing to it. Acosta tried to defend himself a couple of days ago. By most accounts, he did okay, but it didn't stop the furor. And this morning, he told the president he was going to resign. And instead of Trump tweeting it out, he actually brought Acosta out to the press line while he was getting ready to board Marine One on Friday morning. So that's the sound in the background here as Alex Acosta explains his decision to resign.
Over the last week, I've seen a lot of coverage of the Department of Labor. And what I have not seen is the incredible job creation that we've seen in this economy, more than 5 million jobs. I haven't seen that workplace injuries are down, bucking a 3-year trend. Workplace fatalities are down, bucking a 3-year trend. That we had the safest year ever in mining, the lowest number of fatalities ever in mining. I have seen coverage of this case that is over 12 years old, that had input and vetting at multiple levels of Department of Justice. And as I look forward, I do not think it is right and fair for this administration's Labor Department to have Epstein as the focus rather than the incredible economy that we have today. And so I called the president this morning. I told him that I thought the right thing was to step aside.
So there you go, Jim. I'm sure he'll get quite a bit of blowback for trying to dismiss it as a case that was resolved 12 years ago. But it does clear the slate in terms of it not being the question of the day before the administration anymore. He will stay on for another week here. But now the question becomes, where else does this coverage go? And where does the media try to pin additional blame here?
Yeah, to the extent this is good, it means that the story du jour, day after day, is not going to be, is Alexander Acosta going to resign today? By virtue of being in that position, he was giving every critic of the administration a easy stick to hit him with. I put it forth earlier in the week saying, does anybody want to defend Acosta and the way he handled the case? And somebody pointed out and said, look, the Wall Street Journal editorial board said he followed proper procedure. Folks who know him reached out and said, look, he's a really good guy, and nobody had any objections at the time. I suppose I could see that. I do think, as you said, not running it by the victims seems really inexcusable in retrospect. I also find the willingness to give such a very lenient sentence to a guy committing crimes on this scale really seems odd and inexplicable. I just don't understand, if you're a prosecutor, how you don't want to take a guy like this and just nail his hide to the wall. And the great irony, of course, is that Acosta had done that in other big, high-profile drug lords. And, it was I don't think there's any way you can look and say, oh, well, this was really terrific judgment on his part. Is it fair that this is coming along and derailing his career in July 2019? Maybe not. But in the end, the interesting question will be, after these initial arrests and after this initial prosecution, did that stop Epstein? Or did he continue doing this on other venues and other places? And if so, didn't you basically let a monster back out onto the streets a lot quicker than you otherwise would have, even if you'd rolled the dice and taken it to trial? Now, as you said, the big question here is, this has been this has been a weird story. Those of us who paid attention to this remember the stories about the Lolita Express back in 2016. And of course, if you're on the right, you probably heard about it in the context of Bill Clinton. Now, obviously, a lot of folks in the mainstream media are like, hey, also, there's a comment from Trump several years ago talking about what a swell guy he is. And there's this creepy comment from Trump saying he likes women even younger than I do. Look, okay, we got the Acosta angle out of the way, media. How much are we going to focus on this? Or is this story going to disappear? It's been very weird to see The initial case against Epstein began. The Miami Herald basically forced the reopening of the case with this giant reporting, and when the deal with Acosta became clear, and then, of course, the prosecutors up in New York brought new charges today. I don't want this story to go away. As we discussed earlier this week, there's a bunch of things that really don't add up about the sequence of events. If you want to throw grief at Acosta, go right ahead. I think he's earned it. However, there's this weird detail in which one of the prosecutors of Office of the Manhattan District Attorney tried to prevent him from getting classified as the most dangerous kind of sexual offender. And the judge says, I've never seen that happen before, in which the prosecutor is effectively acting as the defense attorney. The NYPD, he was supposed to check in with the NYPD every 90 days. He never did it for 8 or 9 years. No consequences. That seems really weird. Acosta got asked about rumors going around that Epstein may have had some sort of tie to an intelligence service. Acosta responded with basically word salad. Like, to me, that's a yes or no question, right? You're the prosecutor. You're familiar with the case. You should be able to say either yeah or no. And if that's the case, this opens up a whole other can of worms of, was he blackmailing people? Was he doing it on behalf of some foreign intelligence service? I can't imagine it would be our own intelligence service. If that's the case, it's going to be the biggest scandal of all time. Just one weird situation of another. And the question of how many powerful and influential people knew what was really going on in Epstein's mansion and places like that. So, how does a place get the reputation, the nickname Pedophile Island, and not spur? Like, if you're the local cops, how do you not say, hey, you know what, I'm going to check out that place. let's open up. Let's just see what we find there, because those rumors probably don't spring out of nowhere. So I hope the story doesn't get dropped. I hope this doesn't suddenly become a much less interesting story without the Trump cabinet angle. Obviously, everybody in our world of conservatives, Greg, is salivating practically over the possibility that there's some sort of significant tie to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's public statement about this is already contradicted by known facts and media accounts and FAA flight records and things like that. Stay on this, media. Don't drop it just because Acosta's going away, because I think there's a lot more meat on this bone and a lot more questions that need to be answered. Yeah, kind of staggering that the media, given how many factual inaccuracies were in Clinton's statement, just kind of said, well, there's a statement. Anyway, let's talk about Alex Acosta. So, yeah, does he deserve some grief? Sure, but you'd think the primary angle of this story is the deal that Acosta signed off on. And it's an angle. I think it's part of the story, but the proportion of coverage of it to the other rich and famous people associated with Epstein is really, you can see what's driving the traffic these days, Greg. Yes, exactly. And who else might have been part of this should be a really important topic for the people covering this story. We'll see if that changes now that Acosta has announced he will be resigning. All right, let's move on to our bad martini now, Jim. And we're not sure just how bad this is, but there's certainly some bad elements to it. The Texas Republican Party is sending out fundraising emails, which is no surprise. You and I probably get a lot of these in our inbox, especially around the end of the quarter. And if you can just send in $10 or $50 or $100, we've got to reach this goal by the end of the quarter or we're just doomed. And the parties do that too. So this Republican Party email in Texas says, if you don't show up for Trump in 2020, there's a high chance it will cost him the election. This is Newsweek reporting now. The GOP email claimed that the Democrats are promising open borders to illegal immigrants, though no 2020 Democratic candidate has said they support open borders. That's certainly debatable. Quote, they want to take every last penny from your paycheck and control how you live to pay for their socialist policies and systems, the email continued. It ended by asking for a donation to the Trump campaign. So, Newsweek asks, is the GOP fear-mongering for donations, or do they actually fear that the solidly red state is rapidly shifting to the left? They mentioned Beto O'Rourke coming close, but ultimately losing to Ted Cruz last year in the Senate race. And recent polling shows Trump beating every major Democratic presidential candidate except Joe Biden, although it's much closer than the 9-point win he had in 2016 over Hillary Clinton. So, Jim, fundraising pitches, even the desperate ones, are pretty common these days in politics, regardless of whether the pitch behind them is backed up with a lot of truth. So what do you make of Texas doing this, several months beyond a year ahead of the election? Yeah, I kind of would rather they didn't, not just for, reasons of, in case you're wondering, I never donate to any candidate or campaign. I'd like to say that's a principled viewpoint as a journalist because I cover these people. I don't want to be seen as tainted by financial donations to them. But it also is because I'm really cheap and just don't want to. But the point is that, you get these, if you don't donate right now, we're all going to die. But also we've got a, generous donor who will match every donation. Well, why not go to that guy? Why are you nagging me for? But when you go with this desperate, help us or we're all is doomed, tone, I mean, that must be effective because you see so much of it, but it also kind of gives people, it feeds narratives, right? The question of, are you genuinely worried or you just, want to raise money? And the idea of Trump losing Texas, I don't think it's likely, but it's not, an otherworldly, scenario. He won by 9 points in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, which doesn't sound that bad, except, we're used to Republicans winning by healthy double-digit margins. I think we really got spoiled by having George W. Bush on the ballot for a while because he was winning Texas by huge margins. And here, bit by bit, the usual Californication that goes on in a whole bunch of other states, people from more liberal places move into there. The margin in 2016 was not overwhelming. For perspective, his margin in Texas was about the same as it was in Ohio. And people don't think of Ohio as being a deep red Wyoming level state. They think of Ohio as a purple state that's turning red. Maybe Texas is one of those states that's red and turning kind of magenta here. Do you need to panic about it? No. Worst case scenario, maybe you do have to sweat Texas. And Texas is a very expensive state. By the way, I think a portion of this is stylistic. George W. Bush being a local helps a great deal. I think if you have candidates who either have ties to Texas or styled, that basically are of the Texas culture, you're probably going to do a little bit better than the, billionaire Manhattan, mogul out there. Again, I think Trump is going to win, but when the Texas Republican Party is running around messages like this, one, you give Newsweek the excuse to write these kinds of stories, and maybe there is a little bit of truth to that. So I think if you're, I understand the fundraising, the interests of the party's messaging as a whole and the interests of the fundraising wing of the party are completely at odds, right? The party as a whole wants to give this confident, reassuring message, and the fundraising one needs to say, if you don't write a check right now, we will turn Soviet overnight. And, I think it's inevitably going to cause headaches and maybe feed into a panic narrative. Because if it really is true and they really are worried about Texas, then 2020 is going to be a disaster for Republicans.
Oh, absolutely right. Here's what I would like to see. Can't really do it with parties so much, but with candidates who say, if we don't reach this goal by the end of the quarter, we don't know how we'll continue. They should have to not continue at that point. Or
there you go. We didn't meet your goal, but we're hanging around anyway. So.
That's right.
Yeah, we lied.
Let's move on to our crazy martini now. And we're really not trying to find a way to include Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez into the Three Martini Lunch so often, but she makes it so easy. And on the days where she's not, her staff is. Yesterday we talked about the back and forth between AOC and Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi telling the rebels in her caucus not to tweet out their criticisms, but to take it to her personally. AOC wonders why she's always going after people of color. Now it's the chief of staff, yet again, who's getting headlines for Ocasio-Cortez. It was just a couple of weeks ago when the Democrats in the House agreed with the Senate Republicans on the border aid bill, and the chief of staff for AOC said that they were going back to the 1940s in their treatment of black and brown people. That didn't go over too well, and now he's at it again. Fox News. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff recently admitted that the Green New Deal was not conceived as an effort to deal with climate change, but instead a how do you change the entire economy thing, a remark likely to fuel Republican claims that the deal is nothing more than a thinly veiled socialist takeover of the U.S. economy. Quote, the interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all, Saikat Chakrabarty, hope I'm saying that right, said in May, according to the Washington Post. He reportedly made the remarks to Sam Ricketts, climate director for 2020 hopeful and Washington Governor Jay Inslee, who the Post says greeted the statement with an attentive poker face. Quote, do you guys think of it as a climate thing, Chakrabarty said then? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. The Green New Deal, once an idea on the fringe of the left of the Democratic Party, has picked up significant mainstream support this year, with a number of top 2020 contenders signing their names to a non-binding resolution pushed by AOC and Senator Ed Markey. So, Jim, this doesn't shock us. This is what we thought they were doing all along, but it's kind of nice that they're admitting it, and seeing the disarray now inside Camp AOC is also kind of fun.
Yeah, a couple of weird aspects of this. For starters, Greg, you're in cover Washington a great deal. Off the top of your head, how many chiefs of staff of members of Congress can you name?
Very few.
And how often do you see him doing interviews?
Not very often.
Right? I mean, if you're a staffer, your job is not to make you look good. Your job is to make your boss look good. And for a lot of these, occasionally a press secretary or staffers will, answer questions from reporters, but you don't delve into here's our messaging and here's what we really think of all these sorts of things and stuff like that. That is strange. And my whole morning jolt today, usually I cover a variety of topics, but just watching the chaos and the circus around AOC and what Nancy Pelosi is calling the squad really kind of got my dander up. And I kind of look, somebody said this is the quintessential millennial sense of entitlement. AOC has been on the job 6 months and already she's telling the boss how to do things. Right? And so this mentality of, I just got here. I don't have lots of legislative experience before. We've all heard the comments about her being a bartender. But here I am, Nancy Pelosi and other centrist Democrats. Let me tell you how to do things. And oh, by the way, in the meantime, my chief of staff is going to completely step on our message that this needs to be done to save the planet and say, no, really, this is mostly about economics and transferring us to socialism. Right? I mean, like, this is amateur hour, right? This is the sort of thing where, like, if you were, it's tough for us on the right to try to get into the mindset of the left, but they can't be that happy about this. They can't. There's not like you think the rest of the House Democratic caucus is saying, "Hey, that's great. Yeah, let's drop the climate thing. Let's say the Green New Deal really isn't that much about climate change, global warming, stuff like that. It's really mostly about completely overhauling the entire economy that, we want to change even as unemployment is below 5. Like, we're at Dow 27,000, right? This is not a deep recession. This is not another Great Depression. This is not the worst of times. And the Democratic message is going to be, we want to completely change everything about the economy. This is what happens when you let people who, in my view, people who tout themselves as populist outsiders. I'm not part of that Washington machine. I'm not part of the DC crowd, which means I have no idea how things work. I have no idea how to influence my colleagues. It means the moment I have a disagreement with my colleagues, I jump onto social media and I complain about them like I'm trying to get the attention of Delta Airlines because they lost my luggage. Or I had really bad service at a chain restaurant or something like that. No, guess what? You complain about these people on Tuesday, you still need to work with them on Wednesday. If I at National Review decide to complain about my coworkers every single opportunity and jump on social media, I'd have real problems, even assuming I stayed around that long. Same thing with you and Radio America and probably most of our listeners. Guess what, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? You can't fire other members of the staff, other members of the House. The only tool you've got is persuasion. And none of this is working. And having the first thing is probably to say, everybody on my staff, stop talking to the media and providing your own messaging, right? The second thing is get united on your messaging. Third of all, stop fighting and publicly calling out all your colleagues. And the fact that they're not doing that is probably really good news for conservatives. But I think it's this broader kind of the culture here. If a year from now or 2 years from now, 3 years from now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sitting there thinking, why haven't we passed the Green New Deal? Why do I have so little influence with my colleagues? Why do people not vote the way I want? Look, it's because of the method she uses. These are the consequences of that. And while it's great for us, I certainly hope enough people are learning the lessons from that. Look, you want to win friends and influence people and get your way in a legislature? Read about LBJ and the Robert Caro books. Study the people who actually did it successfully rather than deciding, I'm a revolutionary. There's nothing in the past that can possibly educate me or illuminate something for me.
Well, this is interesting on a number of levels because, first of all, for the second day in a row, you've given the Democrats good advice, which makes me a little bit nervous. But if they want,
they would listen. I'd be much more, circumspect.
Secondly, if there was a very popular initiative on the right and a chief of staff or someone like that basically said that the stated reason that was behind the legislation, because there was some sort of crisis, was really bunk, I'm pretty sure that other people who are more prominent would be asked about it. And so I'm wondering if somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who has publicly endorsed the Green New Deal, will ever be asked about this in the next few days, because AOC and all these other people have been pushing the Green New Deal, and now we know exactly why they're doing it.
Those of us at the time were looking at this and saying, besides all the jokes about cow farts and stuff like that, that even, let's say, retrofitting buildings to make them more energy efficient is a good thing. In fact, I think it is a good thing. I think most people would agree, oh, okay, I want to pay less on my heating bills and my air conditioning bills, put more insulation in there, take care of, like all kinds of things could be a good idea. You want to put solar panels on the top of your house? Go right ahead, right? But the idea that we're going to do this to every building in America within a decade, right? I mean, the fact that this clearly was the sort of thing was dreamt up by somebody who never actually had to install a solar panel, who've never actually had to, where's that draft coming from? Or to get Owens Corning insulation and all that kind of stuff into their attic. This stuff is hard to do for the average homeowner. Never mind the idea of doing it on a national scale. And it's the idea of what happens when people live in this theoretical life and have very little practice with the actual changes they want to enact there.
And of course, it's always 10 years from now because nothing's going to happen until 2021. So even if the Democrats win across the board, they'll push the goal line to 10 years beyond that. If the Republicans hold the Senate but Democrats win the White House and keep the House, it'll be 10 years from 2023 because they've got to keep the goal line out there. If they actually cross it, then they lose their purpose for passing this. And so it's always just a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, in the end, this is what separates the new socialists from the old socialists, Greg.
Yes.
They used to be into 5-year plans. But a 10-year goal is twice as good as a 5-year plan.
Oh, man. I love it when they're honest. It really makes our job so much easier. Jim, have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review, also the author of Between Two Scorpions. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great weekend and tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.